It was a cold Sunday night, and the moon had just crept up from behind the clouds. Me and Hunter didn't have any plans. The hockey club social had devolved into a wine and cheese night, and being two very red-blooded second-year students, we wanted something a little bit more lively. That's how we ended up wandering the streets looking for a house party to crash. The town that we lived in was nearly entirely made up of students, so we had expected to find one rather easily. Exams were coming up, however, and to our displeasure we had found that most houses were dark and quiet. "This sucks balls, man," Hunter grimaced as he pondered the bleak expanse of shut doors and turned off fairy lights. "We should just go to the student union. Least there's music. We may as well go home. I'd take a spliff." And an early night over a school disco, I grunted and Hunter shrugged in response. "What's that over there? Do I hear?" "Hell yeah, I do." Hunter ran ahead of me, slurring his words. In the distance, the faintest halo of a well-lit house could be seen, and a very dim, yet present, drum beat. That's a house party if ever I saw one. Fancy house too. Rich girls love to. Don't be crude, none of them will want you anyway. Look at the state of you. I laughed. Hunter was swaying with the wind and trying very hard to stay on the footpath. He had gone a little too hard at pre-drinks. Let's give it a bash. Better than nothing at this point. We headed towards the light, like moths to a flame. As we grew closer, the drum beat became more prominent. It wasn't like any music I'd ever heard before. It was almost like techno, except the drum beats felt more earthy. Usually at the front door of a house party there will be a little crowd of drunk girls pretending to smoke cigarettes. There was none of that here. The door to the house was slightly ajar, with flickering colorful LEDs bouncing off the interior wall. "Let's just slip in," Hunter suggested, and pulled me behind him before I could protest. Something felt wrong, even then. And as I crossed the threshold into that fancy, bouncing, flat, I felt as though I was navigating some dangerous, uncharted territory. It looked like a house party. It even sounded like a house party to an extent. Crowds of people were swaying and dancing to the odd drum beats. There were glasses of oozing green cocktails being passed around like STDs at an orgy. A strange thick smoke hung around the ceiling. A strange variety of weed, perhaps. "This is lit," Hunter whispered to me. He hijacked a glass of that strange green cocktail and downed it in one, his face scrunched up as though he'd just found a fly in the grass. "Tastes funky. Tequila maybe." The girls were pretty, some of the prettiest girls I'd seen. They weren't dressed like students. There were no jeans and a nice t-shirt here. They were all garbed in silvery cocktail dresses and long flowing evening gowns. Each of them looked odd. There was something I couldn't put my finger on. It was like they were catalog models, posing carefully and unnaturally in ways that the photographer suggested were normal. Hunter vanished into the crowds, and I gave up trying to keep track of him. I wanted to get out of the place, and I figured the best way to do that would be to let him get more drunk, then carry him home to our trashy two-bed on the edge of town. I found my own glass of bubbling green. It tasted like grass, but it burned my throat enough to tell me that it would get me drunk quick. "This one has not met you yet." A girl approached me. She had fiery red hair and eyes that were two different colors. She was wearing a strange little gold piece with twisted mauve belts. "Are you from Zircon or Sofrate?" Neither," I replied, taken aback. They were foreign post-grads. Had to be. She looked at me with confusion, which told me I'd answered wrong. "Zircon. That explains why this one does not already have your acquaintance. I'm from Sofrate. Pleasure." She reached her elbow and bumped it into mine. Weird, but okay. "You have really acclimatized well to the local dialect. It's easy to do." I made idle small talk. "I'm Nate. You are." "This one is Congelia. Interesting name you have." "That's very southern." She took a long sip of her green drink. "This one is a category 1. You are." "Category 5. I replied. Post-grad speak. I just had to pretend to fit in. Congelia wasn't bad looking. If I played my cards right, I could pull before Hunter was passed out. Congelia looked impressed. "Oh, I had no idea. This one is your humble servant." She reached out her thin, bony hand and tickled my chin as if it was the most normal thing in the world. This one did not want to come here, but the conglomerate decided that I was needed here. Acclimatization has been challenging to say the least. I could see that. A foreign girl dropped into some little town in England, her hand forced by her parents, or whomever the conglomerate were, trying to find her way around all the odd dialects and temperamental locals. I can see it being hard. You just have to find your people, then it gets easier. A lot of like-minded people here. I took a cursory glance around the room at the odd crowds of stiff party-goers. The men were all tall and fair, and the women all slender and pale. I play hockey. Do you have a sport? Oh, you have even picked up a local hobby. How very dedicated to assemblage you are. This one has not been so efficient, but I am partial to hula boola. She smiled. Do you like hula boola? We don't have that in Zircon, I'm afraid. Care for another drink? I suggested. Oh, do not dishonor me so. As a category 1, it is this one who should serve you the drink. Just wait 2 dialectoids, and this one shall retrieve you a beverage. She smiled unnaturally and squeezed my forearm. Her turn of phrase was odd to say the least. She clearly wasn't comfortable with the language yet. I hovered uncertainly at the edge of the room waiting for Congelia to return. It was then I spotted Hunter on the dance floor. He was doing something that only very slightly resembled break dancing. A few of the party-goers were whispering suspiciously to each other as if dubious as to his invite. I was just about to grab him and hightail it out when Congelia returned. She batted her big eyelashes, and I felt myself go weak at the knees. What's the worst that could happen? Hunter gets kicked out and stumbles home himself. I was fitting in. She thought I was a category 5. Here is your drink. I put some bifula in. It adds a pleasant thrombosis. She explained courteously. You are most pleasing on the eye. This one would be honored to see you in your own skin. We are nearing copulating season. At least we would be back on soft rate. This one wonders if your biology cooperates. Oh, my biology always cooperates. I squinted my eyes, taking a long gulp of my new bubbling green drink. This one has had 43 successful clutches this season alone. I am deemed by the conglomerate as a promising breeding prospect, she said, as if it was the most seductive thing in the world. I spat out my drink. Time to get Hunter. Oh, please don't go. This one would be most unhappy if you were to leave. I was just starting to get my heat. She grabbed a roll of my fat from my belly and yanked me backwards. I felt my balls retreat back up into myself. I have to find my friend. He's drank a bit too much bifula, if you know what I mean, I said to her, forcing a smile. It will only take a moment, she promised. I pondered for a moment. I had 2 options, both very compelling. One was to grab Hunter and run away from the crazy woman who claimed to be a breeding prospect. And the second, arguably more natural choice, was to have my way with her, then grab Hunter and run away. I'm a weak man, and crazy is some of the best sex I'd had in my life. I can be quick, I said to her. She smiled, an upside-down smile, then grabbed my nose and started pulling me up the stairs. I caught a glance at Hunter on the way, twirling and swirling around as 2 suited men glared. I had to be real quick. She only let me go when we were in an extremely neat and tidy bedroom. She shut the door behind us. Congelia paused in front of a mirror and began to rip off her earrings, tearing the skin as it went. She never flinched. Crazy girl. The locals use beds. This one wants to try it. She pointed at the made bed. Didn't they use beds where she was from? Shut your eyes as this one disrobes. You shall be most pleasantly surprised by my mandible. The horny bastard that I was assumed a mandible was some part of the female anatomy. How tremendously wrong I was. I shut my eyes, apprehension tugging at my gut. There were squelching sounds, and the sounds of wet folds falling to the ground. I gulped and thought of my ex, whom I realized in that moment I wasn't over yet. You can open, she said, and I did. I like to think there's a nice little alternate reality where I didn't open my eyes, or at least one where I did, and it was my ex standing there. I wasn't so lucky. I opened my eyes and felt blind terror overwhelm. Every one of my nerve endings. Stood where Congelia had been was a strange spindly mess of burnt red legs. There were 4 of them, and 2 similar appendages where arms should have been. She was something like an ant, though tall and misshapen. Her antennae had glowing lights at their tips, and her eyes, all 7 of them, were empty black voids of philosophical wondering. She moved, her hardened skin clinking and clanking as she clicked toward me, her strange pronged hands reaching out and ripping my shirt. She looked searchingly around my chest, as if expecting to find something there, and when she did, she recoiled. Her long spindles jolted and shook, and she stepped over the fleshy suit she had writhed out of and headed for the door with great urgency. "Isabella," she shouted. "Isabella." Her voice joined a frantic chant that was going on downstairs. 1,000 voices joined with hers. "Isabella," they shouted. "Isabella." I scrambled to my feet, every inch of me shaking and trembling. I pushed past her, but she leapt on top of me. I snapped her arm in two. It made a loud crack and something wet and goopy slipped down on the floor. "Isabella," she shouted, now pained. Everyone seemed so dumbfounded, and that is why I think I made it downstairs without being accosted by one of the others. Hunter was still on the dance floor, but was curled up in a ball. There were 2 other ant things above him, poking and prodding at him like he was a lab experiment. I want my mom. He was crying. In the chaos of the moment, I somehow managed to grab him and get him out. So full of adrenaline I was that I didn't feel the acid hit my back. Boy, did I feel that later. They didn't follow us outside, and I somehow managed to run back home with Hunter draped over my shoulder. I tried calling the police, but they pissed themselves laughing and said I was the funniest student they'd had in years. My back was covered in burns from whatever acid they had spat at me as I fled. It was most superficial, but it had burned a hole through my best shirt. Hunter managed to fall asleep, and I was quite convinced that in the morning he'd have no recollection of the night. I was prepared to file it away in horrifying things I pretend never happened, something that'd keep me up at night, and that I'd drown in alcohol or drugs. It wasn't to be the case. I'm writing this here, not to share a story, but to warn you. I don't think I'm going to be around for much longer to raise the alarm bells that very clearly need to be rung. It started with Congelia, now back in her human form, though missing an arm. She stood at the front of my flat with a blank expression, just staring. Then there was another and another. There's about 50 as I write this here today. The police have been called again. They're on their way. I'm pretty sure they think I'm the victim of some elaborate prank, and I so very hope they're right, because I can hear them heading up my stairs.